The Blackwood estate sat at the end of Rosewood Lane like a monument to everything money could build and nothing it could buy. 7,000 square feet of marble floors, cathedral ceilings, and carefully curated silence. At 6:15 in the morning, the house was still wrapped in that particular stillness that only the very wealthy could afford, the kind that cost a fortune to maintain and felt, to the man who lived inside it, absolutely suffocating. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his third-floor study, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, watching the iron gates at the end of his driveway the way a man watches for something he doesn't quite believe is coming. He was 33 years old and, according to Forbes, the 42nd wealthiest individual in the United States. He had built his software empire from a two-bedroom apartment in Austin at the age of 22, had been on the cover of 3 magazines before he was 30, and had not, if anyone asked him honestly, felt genuinely happy in longer than he could remember. His assistant had reminded him twice this week that he needed to engage more with the household staff. His therapist, Dr. Reeves, had used phrases like emotional isolation and avoidant attachment patterns in their last session. His mother, when she called from Connecticut, still asked every single time whether he was eating enough, as if hunger were the problem. None of them understood. The problem wasn't that he was empty. The problem was that he had filled himself up with the wrong things for so long that he couldn't feel the difference anymore between nourishment and numbness. He heard the front gate buzzer at 6:23. His head of household, Mrs. Patrice Coleman, had already informed him the previous evening that his regular Tuesday cleaning staff would be arriving at 6:30. Maria Santos, who had worked for the estate for 2 years, was on the schedule. He'd barely registered the information. He rarely registered anything about the people who moved through his house like ghosts, efficient, invisible, undemanding. He was still at the window when he heard the front door code being punched in. He heard the soft beep of the panel, the quiet click of the door swinging open, and then, nothing like what he expected. He expected the brisk, professional sound of adult footsteps on marble. He expected the distant hum of cleaning equipment being wheeled into position. He expected, in other words, the ordinary architecture of his ordinary Tuesday. What he heard instead was something small. A tiny pair of shoes. He would later realize they were pink sneakers with Velcro straps and a little rubber star on each toe, making the most earnest, determined, tip-tap sound across his entryway floor. Uneven. Exploratory. The sound of someone encountering marble for the very first time and finding it absolutely fascinating. Ethan set down his coffee. He moved to the top of the grand staircase and looked down, and what he saw stopped something in his chest so completely that he actually raised one hand and pressed it flat against his sternum without realizing he'd done it. Standing in the middle of his entryway, turning in a slow, wide-eyed circle, was the smallest human being he had seen up close in years. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She had dark curly hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, one slightly higher than the other, the way a child's hair looks when someone tried their best but didn't have a second pair of hands. She was wearing a yellow dress with a white collar, tiny white leggings, and those pink sneakers. She had a small purple backpack on her shoulders that was almost comically large for her frame, shaped like a smiling cartoon dinosaur. She was holding, in one small fist, a folded piece of paper. She looked up at the ceiling, at the chandelier that Ethan had paid $40,000 for and genuinely never thought about, and her mouth fell open. Her eyes went enormous. And then she said, to no one in particular, to the chandelier itself, in the most earnest, reverent little voice Ethan had ever heard in his life.
Oh.
Pretty lights. Ethan Blackwood, who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking, who had testified before a Senate subcommittee at age 30 and felt nothing but mild impatience, who had been described in print as formidably unreadable, felt his throat close. He walked down the stairs. The little girl heard his footsteps and turned, and she did not do what most people did when they encountered Ethan Blackwood unexpectedly in his own home. She did not flinch. She did not straighten up or arrange her face into something professional. She looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, her mother's eyes, he would later understand, and she considered him the way only a 3-year-old can consider a stranger, with complete, uncomplicated honesty. Then she held up the piece of paper. "Mama said give you this," she announced. Her voice was serious. Solemn, even. Like she had been entrusted with something important, and she understood the weight of it. Ethan crouched down to her level, a movement that felt strange in his body, unfamiliar, like a muscle he hadn't used, and took the paper from her hand. He unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was slightly shaky at the edges, the way handwriting looks when someone is running a fever and fighting through it anyway. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry. I know this is completely unprofessional and I understand if this affects my position. I woke up this morning with a high fever and I cannot drive safely. My daughter Lily is very well behaved and I have packed her bag with everything she needs. She will not be any trouble. She knows she needs to stay in one room. I could not find alternative childcare on such short notice, and I could not afford to miss today's shift. I will work double time next week to compensate. I have enclosed my cleaning list. I am deeply sorry. Maria Santos." Ethan read it twice. Then he looked up at the little girl, at Lily, and Lily was looking back at him with an expression of careful, patient waiting. She had one hand hooked in the strap of her dinosaur backpack. She was ready. She had a job to do. She had come here to help her mama, and she was going to do that. "My mama's sick," Lily said, because perhaps she thought he hadn't understood. "So, I came instead." And those 5 words, so simple, so earnest, so completely free of anything except love and determination, cracked something open in Ethan Blackwood's chest that had been sealed shut for years. He didn't know that yet. He would only understand it later, when he was lying awake at midnight trying to trace the exact moment his life began to change direction. But the moment was this one. The moment a 3-year-old with uneven pigtails and a dinosaur backpack looked up at him and said, "I came instead," and meant it with her whole entire heart. "Okay," Ethan said, and his voice came out softer than he intended. "Okay, Lily. Let's figure this out." Ethan Blackwood had not spent any significant amount of time with a child since he himself had been one. He had no siblings. His college friends had started having kids in the last few years, and he attended exactly 0 of their children's birthday parties. He found himself standing in his own entryway with a 3-year-old looking up at him expectantly, feeling something he almost never felt in professional contexts. Genuinely, completely uncertain what to do next. Lily, apparently, had no such problem. "Do you have juice?" she asked. Probably," Ethan said. "Mama only lets me have apple juice or orange juice," Lily informed him, with the gravity of someone conveying a constitutional amendment. "Not the purple kind. It makes my teeth color." "Apple juice," Ethan said. "I think we have apple juice." "Okay," she said, and she walked past him toward the kitchen with the absolute confidence of someone who had been told by her mother that the kitchen was where juice came from, and therefore the kitchen was where she was going, regardless of what this tall, confused man had to say about it. Ethan followed her. He watched her stop in the kitchen doorway and look around with those enormous eyes, taking systematic inventory. The professional-grade appliances. The marble island. The Sub-Zero refrigerator. The fruit bowl that his housekeeper kept stocked and that he ate from approximately twice a month. "Big," Lily said of the kitchen. "Yes," Ethan agreed. "Bigger than our whole apartment," she said. It wasn't a complaint. It was purely an observation, the way a scientist notes data. Then she walked to one of the island stools, pulled herself up with enormous effort and determination, and sat down, and unzipped her dinosaur backpack, and began removing items with the methodical focus of someone unpacking for a long stay. A small coloring book featuring cartoon puppies, a Ziploc bag of crayons, a tiny stuffed rabbit, gray and worn to softness, missing one button eye, a folded napkin with what appeared to be 3 animal crackers inside it, a juice box, already packed, he realized, because Maria had anticipated this, had thought of everything even with a fever, and a small laminated card with a phone number written in marker under the words, "If Lily has an emergency, call Mama." Ethan looked at that laminated card for a long moment. He looked at the pre-packed juice box. He thought about a woman who was sick enough that she'd said her hands were shaking, who had still gotten up that morning and dressed her daughter in a clean yellow dress with a white collar and put her hair in 2 pigtails and packed her bag and written an apology letter and sent her to work. He went to the refrigerator and found, somewhat to his own surprise, a carton of apple juice. He poured a glass and set it in front of Lily, who nodded her head the way you nod when something has met your specifications.
"Thank you," she said.
"You're welcome," he said. He stood there. What do you usually do? In the mornings? Lily considered this. "I watch cartoons," she said, "but I don't know if you have my cartoons."
She paused.
"Mama doesn't have the good TV. She says it costs too much." Another pause, data-like, non-accusatory. "Do you have a good TV?" Ethan thought of the 85-inch screen in his living room that he used approximately 4 times a year. "I think so," he said. "Okay," Lily said, picking up an orange crayon and opening her coloring book to a page where a puppy sat inside an outline of a doghouse. "I'm going to color first. Then maybe cartoons." "Okay," Ethan said. He should have gone back upstairs. He had a call at 8 with his Singapore office. He had a contract review at 9:30. He had, in short, an entire day of being Ethan Blackwood, architect of a financial empire, waiting for him at the top of those stairs. He pulled out the stool across from Lily and sat down. She glanced up, assessed him briefly, then reached into her crayon bag and slid a blue crayon across the island toward him. She turned to another page in her coloring book, a puppy chasing a butterfly, and nudged the book so it was half in front of him. "You can do that one," she said. She said it graciously, as if she were doing him a favor, as if she had intuited, with whatever mysterious emotional sonar small children operate on, that this man who lived in this enormous house needed something to do with his hands. Ethan picked up the blue crayon, and for the next 45 minutes, in a kitchen the size of Maria Santos's entire apartment, a 33-year-old billionaire sat across from a 3-year-old girl and colored puppies while she asked him questions. She asked how many rooms the house had. He counted, realized he wasn't entirely sure, and said a lot. She accepted this. She asked if he had a dog, and when he said no, she looked at him with an expression of such gentle, wondering concern that he felt he owed her an explanation. He said he traveled a lot. She said her mama wanted a dog too, but dogs needed space, and they didn't have enough. She said this with perfect equanimity. Just facts. She asked if he had kids. He said no. She looked at the coloring book and then back at him. "That's okay," she said, in a tone that managed to be reassuring without being condescending, and he genuinely did not know how she did that. She asked what he did for work. He said he built computer programs that helped businesses talk to each other.
She thought about this.
"Like when Mama calls Abuela," she said. He said yes, a little like that. She seemed satisfied. She asked, coloring with great focus and total commitment to keeping the orange inside the lines, which she did not always succeed at but clearly cared deeply about, if he was lonely. The crayon in Ethan's hand stopped moving. "Why do you ask that?" he said. Lily shrugged one small shoulder. You have a big house, she said, and it's quiet. She finished a swoosh of orange. Quiet houses are lonesome houses. That's what Mama says. She looked up at him. Our house is loud. Abuela talks a lot, and the neighbor has music. She said it contentedly, without awareness that she'd just said something that would rattle around in Ethan Blackwood's chest for days. I like loud. Ethan looked down at the butterfly he'd been coloring blue. I think I used to, he said. She nodded seriously, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected, and went back to her puppy. At 7:50, his phone buzzed with a reminder about his 8 o'clock call.
He looked at it.
He looked at Lily. She was on her third page now, deeply engaged in coloring a puppy wearing a birthday hat, and she was humming something soft and tuneless and absolutely lovely. He told his assistant to push the Singapore call to 10. By 9 in the morning, Lily had reorganized her corner of the kitchen island, consumed her packed animal crackers and half her apple juice, and informed Ethan that the puppy with the birthday hat's name was Gerald, and that Gerald was turning 4, which was very old. Ethan, who at 33 had personally felt the creeping existential unease of each birthday since 29, chose not to comment on the relativity of age. He had also, in the course of the morning, learned the following: that Lily's full name was Liliana Rosa Santos, that her abuela lived with them sometimes but was in Puerto Rico right now visiting cousins, that her best friend at daycare was named Precious, and Precious had a lunchbox shaped like a dinosaur, which Lily considered the height of sophistication, that her favorite color was all of them but especially yellow, and that the stuffed rabbit with one eye was named Bun Bun and had been a gift from her papa, which Lily mentioned only once, briefly, with a flicker of something in her face that was too complicated for 3 years old and too recognizable for Ethan to look at for very long. He hadn't pushed. She hadn't elaborated. She'd moved on to a puppy wearing sunglasses, and he'd followed her lead. What he had not done was make a single call, answer a single email, or looked at a financial report. This was, by the measure of any ordinary Tuesday in his life, a catastrophe of productivity. It was, by some other measure he couldn't quite name, the most present he had felt in months. Around 9:15, Lily climbed down from her stool. It was a production involving much sliding and a small grunt of effort, and announced that she needed to walk around. I get wiggly, she explained. Mama says I have too much energy. Okay, Ethan said. And then, because it seemed right, do you want a tour? Her face lit up. He showed her the house. He felt, doing it, a peculiar mixture of self-consciousness and something approaching amusement, two emotions he didn't often experience simultaneously. He had bought this house 4 years ago and had walked through it with contractors, with interior designers, with a security consultant, and a structural engineer. He had never walked through it looking at it through someone else's eyes, and certainly not someone who came up to his knee and who found something marvelous in virtually every room. She wanted to know why the library had so many books if you could just look things up on a phone. He told her that some things you had to hold in your hands to really understand them. She accepted this with a nod that suggested she'd file it away for later consideration. She touched the spines of the books with 2 reverent fingers and called them pretty. She stood in the doorway of his home gym and regarded the equipment with deep suspicion. That one's scary, she said of the rowing machine. He told her it wasn't that bad. She remained unconvinced. In the formal dining room, she stopped in front of the long mahogany table that seated 18 people and had hosted, by Ethan's estimate, actual seated dinners for those 18 people exactly twice in 4 years. Once for a board dinner he'd been obligated to host, once for a charity event his assistant had organized while he'd been in Japan and that he'd arrived back for one day late. "Do you eat here?" Lily asked. "Sometimes," he said, which was technically true in the loosest possible sense. "We eat at our table," she said. "It's small. Mama says it's cozy." She ran one finger along the edge of the mahogany. "This one's not cozy." "No," Ethan agreed. "It really isn't." She looked up at him with frank evaluation. "You should get a smaller table," she said.
He thought about that.
"Maybe," he said.
She moved on.
He followed. They ended up in the sunroom at the back of the house, a glass-enclosed space that looked out over the gardens, which were manicured within an inch of their lives by a landscaping team that came every Thursday. The morning sun was pouring through the glass, and it filled the room with warmth and gold, and Lily walked into the center of it and spread her arms out and tilted her face up the way children do when they feel sunlight on their skin, and it's so good they need their whole body to receive it. Ethan watched her. He couldn't have explained, if asked, what exactly he felt in that moment. There wasn't clean language for it. It was something that lived between tenderness and grief, between warmth and a sudden, vertiginous awareness of all the mornings he had spent in this house without once walking into this room and standing in the sun. Lily opened her eyes and looked at him. "Come stand here," she said. He walked over. He stood next to her in the shaft of morning light. She was so small beside him that the top of her head didn't reach his hip. "Warm," she said, with satisfaction. "Yeah," he said. "Warm." They stood there for a minute, maybe two. The garden beyond the glass was still and green, and the sun was extraordinary. Then Lily reached up, without looking, without making a thing of it, with the pure unself-conscious ease of a child who does not yet know that reaching for someone's hand requires courage, and put her small hand into his. Her fingers were tiny against his palm. Her grip was light and certain and absolute. Ethan Blackwood stood very still. He was afraid, in a way that made no rational sense, that if he moved, this would end. Bun Bun was tucked under her other arm. The one-eyed rabbit looked out at the garden with an expression of threadbare dignity. "Bun Bun likes the sun too," Lily said. "Good," Ethan managed. She squeezed his hand once, lightly, and let go. "Okay," she said, with the brisk practicality of someone who has completed a task. "I'm hungry again. Do you have crackers?" He laughed. It came out of him unexpectedly, fully, a real laugh. Not the polished social laugh he deployed at events, not the brief professional acknowledgement of something clever, but an actual laugh, warm and sudden, and a little surprised at itself. Lily looked up at him with approval. "You have a good laugh," she said. "Thank you," he said. "Mama has a good laugh too," she said. When she laughs really big, her eyes close. She started walking back toward the kitchen. "Do your eyes close?" He caught up with her. "I don't know," he said. "I don't laugh that much." She glanced at him sideways. "You should," she said. "Mama says laughing is free, and that's good because we don't have extra money for the expensive stuff." A pause. "Laughing is free for you too, right? Even if you're rich?" "Yes," Ethan said, feeling something catch behind his sternum. "It's free for me too." "Good," she said. And she took his hand again, this time without any ceremony at all, and walked him back to the kitchen to find crackers. He found crackers. He also found a half-eaten sleeve of the expensive biscuits his assistant ordered for client meetings, some cheese, and a bunch of red grapes that he cut in half without thinking about it, and then realized he'd done it because somewhere in the back of his mind he'd registered that whole grapes were a choking hazard for small children, a fact he didn't consciously know he knew. He set the plate in front of Lily. "Grapes?" she said, with real pleasure. "Yeah," he said.
She ate.
He made himself a second cup of coffee and sat across from her and tried, for the fourth or fifth time that morning, to feel guilty about the work he wasn't doing. He kept failing. The Singapore call had been rescheduled. His assistant had flagged 3 emails as urgent, and he had looked at them and decided that none of them were actually urgent in any way that mattered. He had a lunch with a venture capital firm at 12:30 that he was already thinking about canceling. What was wrong with him? He knew what was wrong with him. Lily had asked him if he was lonely, and his crayon had stopped moving because the answer was yes, had been yes for years, and no one had ever asked him directly before. Not his therapist, not his mother, not any of the colleagues or acquaintances who composed the careful social architecture of his life. They danced around it with professional vocabulary and maternal worry. A 3-year-old had just looked at his quiet house and told him the truth. He was thinking about this when his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it. The screen read, Maria Santos, household staff. Lily looked at the phone, then at Ethan. Is that Mama? I think so, he said. Her whole face changed. It went from content and settled to luminous, the way a room changes when you open the curtains. Can I talk to her? He answered and put it on speaker. Maria? The voice that came through was rough, clearly feverish, lower than he'd expected, a little husky, with a thread of anxiety pulled tight through every word. Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry to bother you. I needed to check that Lily arrived safely and that she's not being... I told her to stay in one room, and I know she probably hasn't, but I want you to know I completely understand if... Mama, Lily said, leaning toward the phone with her whole body. A pause. Then, softer, the anxiety dissolving instantly into something pure. Mija. Hi, baby. Are you okay? Are you being good? I'm being so good, Lily said, with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided that this is simply the truth. I colored puppies and I met the man and we stood in the sun, and he is Grape's mama. He cut them small. Another pause. Ethan could hear, in the silence, Maria Santos recalibrating, trying to process a version of this morning that was apparently not the disaster she'd been anticipating. He cut them small, she said, and her voice had changed, gone careful and wondering. Yeah, Lily said. And his laugh is good. I told him. You told him, Maria said faintly. He doesn't laugh enough, Lily reported. I'm fixing it. Ethan pressed one hand over his mouth. Baby, Maria said, can you give the phone back to Mr. Blackwood for a minute? I need to talk to him, okay? I love you. Love you, Mama. Feel better. Lily went back to her grapes with immediate efficiency. Ethan picked up the phone and took it off speaker and walked a few steps away. Maria, he said. Mr. Blackwood. Her voice was so strained with mortification that he could hear it even through the fever. I cannot apologize enough. I know this is so far outside any professional boundary, and I completely understand if you need to let me know go. I couldn't. She had nowhere. Her voice broke slightly on that last word, and she pulled it back together immediately, but he'd heard it. She'd heard herself too. There was a tight silence. Maria, he said. Stop.
She's fine.
She's eating grapes, and she told me I need to laugh more. A sound that might, in other circumstances, have been a laugh. That sounds like her. How are you? A pause, as if no one had asked her that today. Maybe in a while. I'll be okay. It's just a fever. I was going to try to come anyway, but I was dizzy and I didn't want to drive with her in the car, and I couldn't. I should have made better arrangements, I know. Maria. He kept his voice level and gentle, the way you keep a voice level and gentle with someone who is sick and scared and running on empty. You made the right call. She's completely fine. She has been, I want you to know, the best company I've had in this house in a long time. The silence this time was different.
Softer.
She's pretty special, Maria said quietly. I know, he said. And he meant it. He had known it for approximately 3 hours, and he meant it fully. Rest today.
Please.
Actually rest. I'll pay back the... Maria. Firm, this time. Rest. A long pause. Okay, she said finally, and the word was small and exhausted and grateful. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Ethan, he said, without knowing he was going to. Another pause. Thank you, Ethan. He hung up and stood there for a moment, looking at the phone in his hand. Then he walked back to Lily, who was arranging the remainder of her grapes in a line along the edge of the plate with focused artistic intention. Mom, I okay? Lily asked, without looking up.
She's okay, he said.
She's going to rest. Good, Lily said. She doesn't rest enough. She works too much. She looked up then, and something in her small face was older than 3, patient and knowing in a way that made his chest ache. She works really hard, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact she'd been carrying. I know, Ethan said. He sat down. I know she does. Lily nodded and went back to her grape arrangement. I'm going to make her soup when I grow up, she said. Abuela's soup. It fixes everything. A pause. Do you know how to make soup? He thought about his kitchen full of equipment he barely used and a refrigerator stocked by a service, and 4 years of eating alone or at restaurants. No, he said. She looked at him. I'll teach you, she said. When I know how. He canceled the lunch. His assistant, a man named David who had worked for him for 5 years and who prided himself on anticipating Ethan's every professional need, texted back, Is everything okay? Ethan stared at the message. He wrote back, Yes. Better than okay, actually. He could almost hear David's confusion. Lily napped. She hadn't announced this. She had simply, around noon, curled up on the window seat in the sunroom where they'd returned after lunch. He'd made grilled cheese, which she had supervised with intense interest, and awarded a score of really good, with bun tucked under her chin and her thumb hovering near her mouth the way children's thumbs hover when they're on the verge of sleep. Within minutes, she was gone, deeply and completely unconscious the way only children can fall asleep, without negotiation, without anxiety, with total surrender. Ethan sat in the chair across from her and watched her sleep. He was not a man who watched people sleep. He was not, in the normal course of his life, a man who sat quietly doing nothing in the middle of a workday. But he sat there for 20 minutes, and he watched the sun move across Lily's sleeping face and the rise and fall of her small chest and the way her fingers curled around Bun's ragged ear, and he thought about Maria Santos. He had her employment file on his phone. He'd pulled it up while Lily was eating lunch, needing to understand, suddenly, the shape of this woman's life. He knew this was probably somewhere between employer prerogative and something he should examine his motivations for, but he read it anyway. 28 years old. Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Moved to the United States at 19. One dependent listed. Liliana Rosa Santos, 3 years of age. No emergency contact beyond the grandmother, Rosa Maria Santos, listed as currently traveling. Employment history showed 7 years of housekeeping and domestic work across 4 households, consistent positive reviews. A note from Mrs. Coleman, reliable, thorough, professional. Never missed a scheduled shift. Never missed a shift. He thought about what that meant, what it cost in the physical economy of a human life, to never miss a shift. He thought about the laminated card, the pre-packed juice box, the apology letter written with fever-shaky hands. He thought about the moment she'd said she had nowhere and pulled it back before he could hear too much of what was underneath it. He thought about Lily saying she works really hard with those eyes that were too knowing, and he thought about a 28-year-old woman raising a child in an apartment small enough that his kitchen seemed like a country, working in houses like his, being reliable and thorough and professional in spaces where he was increasingly understanding. People like him tended to look right through people like her. He had looked through her. For 2 years, she had been a name on a schedule and a quality check on a cleaning report, and he had not once stopped to see her. He had needed her 3-year-old to come at her place to make him look.
He sat with that.
Lily stirred. She made a small sound, resettled, pulled Bun closer. Her other hand, which had been resting palm up beside her, curled slightly, reflexively reaching for something even in sleep. Without thinking, Ethan reached over and let her curl her fingers around his hand. She settled immediately. Her breathing deepened. She didn't wake. He sat there, this 33-year-old man who had built an empire and lost a self somewhere along the way, with a sleeping 3-year-old's hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers, and he felt something he would spend days trying to name. It was close to peace. It was close to purpose. It was the feeling, he would eventually understand, of being needed in a way that had nothing to do with his money or his name or anything he had built, being needed just because he was there and warm and present, just because he existed in the room. When Lily woke, she blinked at him, disoriented for a moment, and then she smiled, a wide, unguarded, fully committed smile that used her whole face. "You're still here," she said, as if she'd half expected him to disappear. "I'm still here," he said. She sat up, gathered Bun, yawned hugely, showing all her teeth. "Did you eat lunch?" she said, in a tone that suggested she was the kind of person who checked on these things.
"I did," he said.
"You supervised, remember?" She nodded. This was satisfactory. "Can we go in the garden?" she said. "I want to see the flowers." He took her outside. He watched her crouch over a bed of white roses and examine them at close range with the microscopic intensity that children bring to natural things, things that adults have learned to glance at and classify and move past. She looked at each one like it was an individual.
"They smell good," she said.
She looked up at him. "Do you smell them?" He hadn't. He honestly hadn't, he realized, smelled the roses in his own garden, possibly ever. He crouched down beside her, and he smelled the roses. They were extraordinary. "Yeah," he said. "They really do." She nodded. "Mama would like these," she said. "She likes flowers. She has one plant in our apartment. She talks to it." A pause. "I think it likes it." He looked at the roses. He looked at Lily. He thought about a woman who worked in houses full of flowers and went home to one plant that she talked to. "What's your mama's favorite flower?" he asked. Lily thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Yellow ones," she said finally. "She says yellow flowers look like happy." He filed that away like something precious. Maria Santos came back the following Tuesday. She stood in the entryway of the Blackwood estate at 6:30 in the morning, and she was clearly bracing herself. He could see it in her posture, the slight squaring of her shoulders, the careful professionalism she'd armored herself in. She was 28 years old, and she was wearing a neat gray uniform, and her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes, Lily's eyes, enormous and dark and honest, were doing their level best to be unreadable. She had clearly prepared for this to be uncomfortable. She had probably rehearsed an apology. She was a woman who had spent years learning the particular discipline of making herself small and unobtrusive in the spaces of other people's lives, and she had arrived this morning ready to perform that discipline flawlessly. Ethan Blackwood met her in the entryway. And before she could say anything, before she could produce whatever careful, formal apology she'd prepared, he said, "There are yellow tulips in the sunroom. I thought you might like to see them before you start." Maria Santos stopped. She stared at him. "Yellow," he said, slightly less certain now, "because Lily said yellow flowers look like happy, and I thought." He stopped. He suddenly felt the full absurdity of Ethan Blackwood, 42nd wealthiest person in the United States, explaining his flower choices to a member of his cleaning staff. He felt his face do something unfamiliar. "I probably should have led with asking how you're feeling."
"I'm sorry."
"Are you feeling better?" Maria Santos looked at him for a long moment. Her careful professional expression was doing something complicated. He could see it working, rearranging, the armor shifting under the pressure of tulips, and the memory of her daughter saying he has a good laugh. "Yes," she said. "Thank you. I'm much better." A pause. "You bought yellow tulips?" "My assistant ordered them Thursday," he said. "I told him they were for. I said they were for the house." He cleared his throat. "They're in the sunroom. If you want." She followed him to the sunroom. The tulips were in a clear vase on the table where Lily had slept, and the morning light was coming through the glass, and they were yellow in that particular way that made yellow make a case for itself as the best possible color in the world. Maria stood in front of them, and she didn't say anything for a moment. He watched her swallow. "Lily told you," she said. "That yellow flowers look like happy," he said. "Yes." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright. Not crying, not quite, but bright in the way eyes get when something has caught them off guard and moved past all the careful defenses. "She talked a lot?" Maria said. "She asked me if I was lonely," he said. "Within the first hour." A sound escaped Maria, half laugh, half something more tender. "Of course she did." She looked at the tulips. "She doesn't have a filter." "I know," he said. "I was grateful for that." Maria looked at him. He looked at her. Something that had no name moved through the space between them, something that had been building through a week of thinking about laminated cards and one-eyed rabbits and laughter being free and the shape of someone else's life. "She talks about the man with the good laugh," Maria said quietly. "Every day this week." A pause. "She wants to know when she can come back and teach you about soup." "She's welcome back," he said. "Whenever you need her to be. Anytime." Maria looked at him for a long moment, assessing, still cautious, still carrying all the learned wariness of a woman who had navigated the world on her own for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. What changed after that changed slowly. He would not have been able to mark any single moment as the turning point, because turning points in real life are rarely singular. They are accumulations. They are yellow tulips and shared grapes and a child's hand in yours and the smell of roses you've never bothered to smell. He began, genuinely, to see the people who moved through his life. He began to learn their names, the landscaping crew, the overnight security staff, the woman who delivered his dry cleaning every Wednesday. He began to understand, through the simple and devastating education of a 3-year-old's observations, that he had been living at a distance from everything, insulated by wealth and busyness and the elegant myth that connection was a luxury you could defer. He had a conversation with Mrs. Coleman about compensation and benefits for the household staff. He restructured things. He didn't announce it. He just did it. He also, and this was the part that would take the longest, that would require the most of him, he started showing up to his own life. He started eating in the small breakfast nook at the back of the kitchen instead of at the 18-person table. He started going to the sunroom in the mornings and standing in the sun. He started returning his mother's phone calls on the same day she made them. And every Tuesday and Friday, when Maria Santos came to work, they talked. Not about the house. About things. About Lily and about Puerto Rico, and about what he was reading and what she was studying. He learned in the third week that she was taking online business classes at night after Lily was asleep, paying for them herself, one course at a time. He learned this the way you learn things about people when you finally start listening, accidentally, in passing, in the small information that emerges when someone stops being invisible to you. He didn't act on what he felt for a long time.
He was careful about that.
He understood the weight of his position relative to hers, understood that he needed to be certain, understood that whatever he felt had to be demonstrated in action before it could be named in words. He gave her the information about the educational assistance program his company offered. He connected her with the woman who ran his foundation's scholarship initiative. He did these things carefully and without fanfare, and without making them feel like charity, because they weren't charity. They were one person who had more than enough and could see clearly for the first time, finding ways to be useful that weren't about power. Lily came back in December. Maria had a parent-teacher conference, and the daycare was closed, and she arrived again with the dinosaur backpack and the uneven pigtails, and this time Ethan was waiting in the kitchen with apple juice already poured. "You remembered," Lily said, and the delight in her voice was so complete and so uncomplicated that it broke something open in him all over again, something that had been resealing, and that her delight broke open freshly, a reminder that joy is not a limited resource. He had also, in a corner of the kitchen, set up a small table and 2 chairs and a new coloring book and a full set of crayons. Lily walked over to it and stood there for a moment, taking it in. "Is this for me?" she said. "And for me," he said. "If you'll have me." She turned and looked at him. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's dignity and something entirely her own. This particular quality of open-hearted readiness for the world, this refusal to approach anything with less than her whole self. "Okay," she said, with great seriousness. "But I get the orange crayon." "Always," he said. He is 33 and she is 28 and Lily is 3, and none of them know exactly what the shape of this thing is yet, what it will become, what it will build, what name it will eventually ask to be called. But Lily knows that the man with the good laugh has yellow flowers in his sunroom and cuts grapes small and sits in the sun. Maria knows that somewhere along the way, she stopped bracing herself to walk through his door and started, quietly, looking forward to it. And Ethan Blackwood knows that the most important thing that ever happened in his 4,200 square foot house full of marble and silence happened the morning a tiny girl with a dinosaur backpack walked through the door instead of her mother and told him the truth about his life. "So, I came instead." 5 words. One morning. An entire world beginning to change. The tulips bloom yellow in the sunroom every week now. Maria told him once that when she walks in and sees them, she thinks, "This is what it looks like when someone is paying attention." He thinks she's right. He thinks paying attention might be the whole thing, after all, the whole secret, the whole art, the whole practice of being alive alongside other people in a way that actually counts. He thinks he wasted a lot of years not knowing that. He's grateful he knows it now. He's grateful it only took one small girl, one dinosaur backpack, and 5 words to teach him. And